So what I want to do is we're starting the major portion of Proverbs, Proverbs chapter 10 to 30, really, is the collection of Proverbs as we most commonly think of them. Most Proverbs are 2 lines, and the second line is in some way directly connected to the first. It's not true of every single proverb, but the great majority of them are structured in that 2-line structure with the second line related to the first. There are a number of proverbs as you get later, chapter 22 and to the end of the book. There are lengthier proverbs. Some of them are 4-line proverbs, some of them are 6-line proverbs. And so they're longer, but this structure still remains. There's still a connection between one part to the next. There, in this connection, it was called parallelism. And I'm going to be more technical today than I normally am. And I'm going to do that because these are really important rules or guidelines in understanding what the proverb is saying. Because when we get to Proverbs chapter 10, as you well know, you read the proverb and there's a point of, okay, what does this mean? And because of the way Proverbs is structured, Proverbs chapter 10 to chapter 30, there's not often a connection between one verse and the verses immediately before and after it. So certainly Proverbs 10 to Proverbs 22, any connections before in the chapter or with the immediately before or after verses is only a loose connection. And so in this case, the context doesn't help us a whole lot. What helps us a lot is the parallelism. Because, well, I'll explain that as we're going through. So what I mean by parallelism is this connection of one line to the next. So if you think about it as an equal sign, you have a parallel line, and then a line that is horizontal, and then below it is a line parallel to the line above it. That's really what we're talking about. There is a connection, some sort of mirroring between the 2 lines. And what I'm going to describe is the different kinds, or some of the major kinds of parallelism that we're going to see in Proverbs. So the first one is repeating parallelism. The technical word for this, if you want to write it down, or maybe in your notes, is synonymous. What it means is the same or similar ideas are repeated in the second line. So you basically are saying the same thing twice. It's not using the same words, though there's often is a repetition of words, but they're not identical, but the same idea is being communicated. So you have, for example, Proverbs 18:15. The heart of the prudent acquires knowledge, and the ear of the wise seeks knowledge. Now, you should see at least one immediate repetition of the major words there. What word is repeated in both lines? Knowledge. So there's very clear there. There is certainly a idea repetition, a big concept. So the heart of who? What? Prudent. Where is that idea repeated in the second line? Wise. Now you have acquire and seek. It's not quite so parallel, but I think we see there's strong connection between them. The idea of seeking and finding, if you will. And then you have the heart and the ear. They're not as parallel, but in the context, in the verse, certainly he is saying exactly the same thing. But what's fascinating about this, and why this is such a rich way of studying, is he starts off and he says, the what? Heart. What is the heart? Okay, yeah, the inner man. That's a really good way of saying it. Your inner being, who you are within. And then the second line, the ear. What's the ear? It's actually in Proverbs, ear is always used to mean ear. It's the physical organ on the outside of our heads that captures sound waves and pushes them into our brains. So we have that what is different between these two parallel lines points us to both the inner man and the outer man. You see why I'm saying that? It's the whole person is involved in this process of getting knowledge. That's what the parallel structure does. It shows us the connections. And then once we see all these connections, we see the differences. They're never just saying the same thing twice identically. There's always a little bit of a difference. And it's in those differences where we really see the richness, the depth of what is being communicated. So these repeating proverbs say one thing in the first line and say essentially the same, though not identically the same, in the second line. The second kind are contrasting proverbs, and these are the majority of the proverbs. And one of the easiest ways to tell that you're looking at a contrasting proverb is the conjunction but. When you have a line and it says but, you more than likely are looking at a contrasting proverb. This is also called, and if you want to write this down, if you care, it is antithetic. I'm probably going to use this word at different times as we're going through this. So antithetic, A-N-T-I-T-H-E-T-I-C. When we talk about contrasting proverbs, we don't mean that it's exact opposites. I would say it's two sides of the same coin. Some have described it as looking at the same truth from two different perspectives. Generally speaking, there is a positive perspective in the sense of there's something to imitate or something being done that is good. And usually there's a negative perspective. There's something to avoid. There's an action that we should not imitate. And so there is some of that antithesis going on in which they are truly contradictory one to one another. But generally speaking, it's just the second line is offering a contrast between the two things. It's showing distinctions and highlighting distinctions. So one example is Proverbs 14:4. The first line, where no oxen are, the trough is clean. The second line, but, there's your contrast, much increase comes by the strength of an ox. So you have it's a very simple comparison here. If you don't have any oxen in your barns, then the food trough is clean. You don't have to muck out any stalls. There's not a whole lot of work you have to do, right? No oxen there, you don't have to take care of them. But on the other hand, oxen may require a lot more work, but you also receive a lot more increase. Because that yoke of oxen is going to plow a whole lot more ground than you can trying to drag a plow behind you or trying to go through and spade up the dirt. And so there's a contrast. An empty barn or a full silo. That's what he's doing. And in the course of that, now this one is a good example too, because it's more observational. I mean, I think we would all recognize this. You know, this is just an observation of the way life works. So where's the wisdom there? Yeah, there's wisdom in part of what it teaches us to value. And one of the things I want to mention as we're talking about these, and we're going to see a number of these observational type proverbs, is they're not just merely making observations. They are imparting something to us, something to avoid or to imitate. So all of the proverbs have a sense of an imperative, of a command about them, of something we should or should not do. And so when you're reading the Proverbs and you're coming across ones like this that are observing life, they're making the observation to point out something. And here, part of it is, what do we value? We value ease. It's going to be expensive. It's going to be expensive in that there's going to be a loss of potential gain. Because we prefer not to have to clean up after the oxen and go feed them every day, then we're also choosing to have less. And in this culture, you're talking about maybe just having enough to barely get by. So, we're not talking about, do I choose between having $50,000 in my savings or $150,000 in my savings? We're talking about the choice between, do I have enough food to last through the winter or not? That makes sense? So I could maybe modernize the proverb a little bit. Where there's no firewood, the house is clean. But by much firewood comes much warmth. You have repeating, same line, or both lines say the same basic thing, contrasting the second line in some significant way, contrast the first line. It's restating the truth from a different perspective. Then we have, and those are going to be your most common ones, and they're going to be the easiest ones to see. You also have a developing parallel. So what this is the thought in the first line is completed, expanded, explained, or in some way made more full in the second line. So it may look like a repeating parallel, but part of what it's doing is it's giving additional information about the first line. So let me give you one example of this. Proverbs 11:30. The fruit of the righteous is a tree of life, and he who wins souls is wise. These are not repeating by any means, and they're certainly not contrasting. Rather, what you have is this kind of synthetic proverb. That should be the word in your parentheses there, synthetic. It's now adding a little bit more information so that we see the fruit of the righteous is directly related to the winning of souls. We're looking at the comparisons between those. And so you got the fruit of the righteous, which is a tree of life. This delivering of souls or this capturing of souls is the fruit of the righteous. I think that's just simply the simplest way to say what's going on here is winning souls is the fruit of the righteous. Now, I will say this is not really talking about evangelism. Evangelism wasn't a thing in ancient Israel. Remember, that's Great Commission given to the disciples in the church. In Israel, it was bringing people in or really being there as a display of God's glory that others would simply see it. Rather, what he's talking about in the winning of souls is, I think James uses the phrase, correcting one or turning one from the error of his way. So this is very much related to what's going on in Proverbs 1 through 9. In turning one from the way of folly to the way of wisdom. So it's not salvation-oriented, but rather it is life. It is that way, the path of our life that we follow. It's geared towards that, so that he who turns one to the path of wisdom is himself wise. And so this is a synthetic or developing proverb because it starts with a line, and if we just say the fruit of the righteous is a tree of life, I don't have a clue what that means. I mean, I might guess it's words, I might guess it's training up a family well, but it could be all kinds of things. But that second line adds to the thought, and it helps us understand what the fruit of the righteous is. I defined win souls the way I did from basically Proverbs 1 through 9. but also Proverbs 10 and 11 and 12. Proverbs 10, 11, and 12 say much about righteousness and wickedness. And so the way he talks about these ideas, that the winning of souls is directly related to turning from folly to wisdom. So it's just, I don't have the verses off the top of my head, but there are some specific verses in Proverbs that lead to that idea. So this is a developing proverb, again, adding to the ideas. And then we have an illustrating proverb. So that now one line is restated in the other, but using a figure of speech. So the technical word is going to be emblematic, an emblem. A figure is used to illustrate what was in the other line. And sometimes, in this one particularly, sometimes the illustration may be first, in the first line, or the second line. So it's not necessarily that the illustration is always the second part of the proverb. But I'll give you an example. As vinegar to the teeth and smoke to the eyes, so is the lazy man to those who send him. So there's a very vivid illustration. So we know, at least I assume you would know somewhat of what vinegar to the teeth feels like. Certainly we all know what smoke in the eyes feels like. And so that irritation is like the effect a lazy man has on those who have entrusted him with some responsibility. It's an illustration. And in the course of that, I think we have a much better idea of what Solomon is communicating. The lazy man is not just worthless, he's an irritant, at least to those who entrust him. And so this is the illustrating or the emblematic. All right, then we have building proverbs, and these are climactic. I think you probably misspelled in your notes. It's not climatic, but climactic. So these have nothing to do with the weather, but it's building up to a climax in the thought. So each line builds on the idea in the earlier line. And when we say builds on, it's not just, like the first one we looked at, the heart and eyes, where we saw that the two together, give us this total package of seeking for wisdom, but rather that the information in the first line is generally made more specific, more precise, more clear. In some way, it's made more in the second line. So Proverbs 24, verses 3 and 4. So this is a 4-line proverb. It says, through wisdom a house is built. By understanding it is established. By knowledge the rooms are filled with all precious and pleasant riches. So you have 3 stages here. You have the first stage, building a house. Then you have the next stage of securing the house. And then you have the third stage of filling the house. So you have climbing upwards. In this one, it's a very logical sequence of just moving upwards so that each line builds on the one before it. Then you have pivoting. And these are sometimes called, this is not in your notes, are sometimes called Janus Proverbs, Janus. It's after a Greek god who had 2 faces, one looking both directions. That's really what's going on here. The pivoting is usually a 3-line proverb. Sometimes it's longer. But what's going on is the middle portion applies directly to what come before it and after it. So you might think of it as a bit of a transition sentence in which there's a direct connection to what has been said and what is about to be said. But so that's why I've called it pivoting, because the whole theme or the whole proverb turns on this central point. It is that hinge on which the proverb swings. So you have Proverbs 24:14. So shall this knowledge of wisdom be to your soul. If you have found it, there is a prospect, and your hope will not be cut off. So if you have found what? Yeah, the knowledge of wisdom in the first line, And so we see there it's looking ahead, but the second line also it's looking back, and it's also looking ahead. He said there's a prospect. Your hope will not be cut off. So this middle line here is looking back and is moving it forward at the same time. This is one you often will see in lengthier passages too, that one of the middle verse will actually be turning and moving from this to that. Let me show you one example if I can find it. Proverbs chapter 8, we saw this. Verse 30, there's actually a couple in here, but Proverbs 8, verse 30, talking about wisdom, of course, being with God, wisdom being the means, if you will, being the instrument of God's creation that God created wisely. Verse 30 says, "Then I was beside him as a master craftsman, and I was daily his delight, rejoicing always before him, rejoicing in his inhabited world, and my delight was with the sons of man." So we have, verse 30 starts off by looking backward at God's creation, that which has been discussed all the way back to verse 23. It's looking backward to God's creation, but it also moves it forward from the delight to the rejoicing. So that we're seeing it's not just a functional thing, but it's a joyful thing. And this verse 30 acts as that hinge which turns this proverb some. The second to last one, mirroring. This is also chiasm. And so what you have is the second part repeats the first part in reverse order. So it's a mirror. Just like you look in a mirror, you're looking at yourself, but it is reversed. And that's what these proverbs do, is it just repeats the first. And so righteous lips are the delight of kings, and they love him who speaks what is right. So you see, you have righteous lips, delight kings. Kings love, speak what is right. So it's repeating it in reverse order. All right, last one, cause and effect. One line states the behavior or the effect of the behavior in the other line. So we all know what cause and effect is, and this one doesn't have a fancy technical term. It's just simply cause and effect. So that one line will tell us what the other line does. There's a lot of options we could give here. This one actually gives us two. Pride is the cause. What's the effect? Okay, a haughty spirit is the cause. What's the effect? Fall. And this shows up in a lot of other proverbs. And so this one, the other ones we've talked about, the repeating, contrasting, developing, illustrating, building, pivoting, and mirroring parallels, they pretty much, it's going to be, if it's antithetic, if it's contrasting, it's not repeating. It's going to be one or the other. If it's pivoting, it's probably not mirroring. And so these somewhat, if it's one, it's more than likely not the other. When we're talking about the cause and effect, this shows up in a lot of different places. Sometimes it just are a cause and effect statement here. This one that you're looking at is what kind of parallelism? It's a repeating. It's saying really the same thing, just in a different way. So we have a cause and effect in a repeating parallel. And so where there are some that I would say are just more or less cause and effect statements, but we're going to see this a lot. So if you read through the book of Proverbs as you're doing your daily reading there, and you just mark in your margins CE, beside every one where you see a cause and effect, you're going to find a slew of them. They're everywhere. Yeah, because that's a big part of Proverbs. It's making wise choices by knowing the consequences of those choices. Let me give you some broad principles that really do apply to all the different kinds of parallels. And so it doesn't matter, in this case, doesn't matter what we're talking about, what kind of parallelism we're talking about. When you see a parallel in a proverb, these principles apply. The lines are to be read together. They complement and explain one another. So in understanding a proverb, you can't stop with the first line. You can't zero in on the second line. They relate to one another. This one's actually a 3-line one, but it gives us the same basic, it does give us a basic principle. Proverbs 25:20 says, like one who takes away a garment in cold weather, and like vinegar on soda, is one who sings song to a heavy heart. So if I just take the last line, is one who sings songs to a heavy heart, there's no information there. I don't have anything. If I just take the second and third lines, like vinegar on soda, is one who sings songs to a heavy heart. To me, that's still lacking. I know if you pour vinegar on baking soda, it froths and bubbles and all of that. I think that's the basic idea of what he's talking about. You pour vinegar on something like that and that kind of substance, and it gets all worked up. The first line, like one who takes away garment in cold weather, that gives us some real understanding of the kind of thing he's communicating. So based on that first line, is singing songs to a heavy heart a good thing or a bad thing? It's a bad thing. And so we have to read all of this together, because if I just say, like one who takes away garment in cold weather, again, there's no information really there. It's just partial. And so we read all of the lines together, and you can illustrate it from every one of the Proverbs. Verse 17, just at the top of my page, seldom set your foot in your neighbor's house. Okay, by itself, there is information there. Don't always be going to your neighbor's house. But he also gives a reason. Why? Yeah, because he's going to get tired of you and just wish you would leave him alone. He's going to hate you. So now we have a rationale for understanding seldom set your foot in your neighbor's house. Because are there times where we should be in our neighbor's house a lot? Yeah. There are seasons of people's life where we should be there. Times of grief, it is good to be there and to minister to them, to be there regularly, for example. And so we have the rationale that helps us rightly apply the principle that he's given. But if we don't have both lines, we don't understand. So we have to read both. Charles McLean likens this to binoculars. You have to look through both lenses to really see fully. You can look through one lens and you see, but you have to have both to see as well as you could. You must look at both lines of the Proverbs. You cannot understand one line of the proverb without understanding the other lines. So when you're reading and studying and you're saying, hey, this is really good, I read this and this phrase jumped out at me, make sure you read the other lines in that proverb. You understand the relationships to one another there, because there are a lot of proverbs, if we take just the one line, we're actually misunderstanding them and misapplying them. So when we go to the whole proverb, that we understand them properly. Often, not always, but often the second line is more precise than the first. So they add further information. This is why we should be looking at both lines. Sometimes they make the image more concrete. You have an abstract idea, wisdom, and then it's given to us in a more concrete form that we can see, oh, wisdom looks like speaking well of a neighbor. Is that all that wisdom is? No. But in the second part, in the addition there, we see there's a concrete way of understanding this. Is not just abstract. It sometimes makes the image more vivid, so that the illustrations pop, like the vinegar on soda and taking away a garment in cold weather, like smoke to the eyes and vinegar to the teeth. There's the vividness of it helps us remember it. Sometimes they make one detail more precise. It talks about the fruit of the righteous. Really, the detail that is explained by Wins Wise is that fruit of the righteous. It's just one part of it. But that second line gives more precision. Sometimes it makes a general statement more specific. So you start with a broader principle, and then you're given a specific illustration of it or application of it in the second line. What it comes down to is the second line really does complete the first. So, for example, in the contrasting parallels, the second line makes clear the details implied in the first. So that you have, so for example, we're told that love covers a multitude of sins. I believe is how it is, but hatred stirs up strife. So we have the two lines together. And so we know that hatred stirs up strife because it does not cover sin. There's a connection there between the two, so we use them to understand each other. That second line really completes and adds to the understanding of the first, and vice versa. The first adds to the understanding of the second. All right, let me remind you of the structure of Proverbs with parallelism in view. This is not in your note. Well, it is in your notes, I believe, on the very first page of the other booklet, the kind of brown tan-colored book. There. So the structure of Proverbs, we have the title, Proverbs 1:1. The purpose statement of Proverbs chapter 1, verses 2 through 6. You see parallel, all the way through. They're parallel lines with one another. Proverbs 1:7, the foundation of wisdom, the fear of the Lord. Chapter 1, verse 8 through the end of chapter 9 is the prologue. It's a plea to choose wisdom. And these are typically not made up of the short Proverbs. So when you're reading chapters 1 through 9, you should be reading the verses in relation to one another in bigger chunks. So it's a set of longer instructions. So you have, for example, the story in chapter 7. It's a long instruction. I looked out my window and saw. And he goes on and describes the destruction of this simple youth. You have Proverbs chapter 9. It's one big poem. The whole chapter is a poem. Proverbs chapter 2, it's all one sentence. So when we're reading the first 9 chapters, you should not expect to see all of these kinds of parallels. There's some present, but really you should be just looking for it in the bigger blocks as longer sections. We get to the Proverbs chapter 10. The Proverbs of Solomon are from Proverbs chapter 10, verse 1 to Proverbs 22, verse 16. And almost all of those are 2-line proverbs. Not all of them, but almost all of them are 2-line proverbs. So you should be looking for the parallelism in those 2 lines. And it's going to be present in almost every case. Then you get to the sayings of the wise, starting in Proverbs 22:17, going to the end of Proverbs 24. There's an introduction. Proverbs 22, verses 12 to 21 is an introduction to that. And then there's another introduction to another block in Proverbs 23, verses 24 to 28. So those are more like standalone units, like longer sections. The sayings of the wise are mostly longer proverbs. They're not 2-line proverbs. They're mostly 4-line proverbs. So when you're reading those, Proverbs 24, 3 and 4, I put up there that the chambers of the house being filled with all precious riches and treasures there. That's the second part of a 4-line proverb. And so you're looking now at those in that structure, not 1, 2, but 1, 2, 3, 4 that you're seeing there. And then you have additional proverbs, the compiled Proverbs of Solomon, chapters 25 to 29. Those were compiled during Hezekiah's day. Those are also generally longer there. In fact, there are some longer sections in that whole unit where you're going to have several verses together. The words of Agor, or Agor, I don't even know how to say his name, but the words of Agor there, those are generally longer proverbs. They start with an introduction, and then there's going to be 4 and 6 line, and some of them are even longer proverbs there. So you're looking at those things, you come to these longer sections. What you're looking for is that hard break in thought. So he starts talking about folly, And then he moves on and talks about immorality. He's changed, though they're related, he really has changed subjects. Or he's talking about drinking, and then he's talking about your neighbor. And how do you relate to him? There's a change in subject. So if you see chapters 22 to 30, you see you're looking for the longer sections and you're marking them out based on the subject matter. If you're talking about the same thing, it's probably one unit. If you change subjects, it's another unit. And so you start your parallelism over there. And then Proverbs 31 are two longer poems. Verses 1 through 10 is an introduction and then instruction to King Lemuel about drinking. 11 to the end of the chapter is instruction to Lemuel about a virtuous woman. And so those are longer structures. The parallelism is still there somewhat, but not as significantly as 10 through 22:16. So I know I raced through that, but if you go back and you look at your notes in the first, I think it's the first week where I gave the structure of Proverbs, this will help you as you're thinking through and you're trying to figure out, what am I looking at? If you're in chapter 24 and you can't find a two-line parallel, it's probably because it's not there. If you're in chapter 12 and you find a four-line parable, you're probably not. You probably are actually looking at a two-line parallel.